Well, thank you for having me, first and foremost. Second of all, let's try and make sure that we can share the presentation. Um, yeah, looks like it's happening. Excellent. I'm not going to ask if everyone can see it. I know we can. I'm going to skip the normal Zoom pleasantries and just jump straight into it, if that's okay with everyone. So we're here to talk about this big chunk of a topic again. And unfortunately, because we do that, a couple of the things I'm going to say have been said before. You would have heard them before. I would have been on and on about them, or others would have. Unfortunately, these definitions will need to be repeated for a while, probably up until we all agree on them and we start doing some of the big work. But just kind of to warn anyone who has potentially seen the other conversation we've had, that some of this will be in common. The difference is today we're talking about what is it that we can effectively do so that we start changing this. A little bit of an intro slide. To be fair, the hosts have been gracious enough to give you a lot of this background. I'm absolutely not going to read out loud all of these things, but the slide is here of late for me so that I can say it doesn't tell you anything, and it doesn't. You may have seen my LinkedIn profile before or the presentation that the hosts have made, but none of it tells you much at all about me as a person. And that's kind of the problem we're having in the workplace as well, where we know a lot about our people, but we know very little about what makes them tick, what their emotions are, anything really personal and so on. So this slide wouldn't cover that. I got married in Vegas a couple of weeks ago, or that I now have 4 kids. None of that is kind of in these numbers. And equally, we need to get to a place where slides will have those things on them, I think. So really quickly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I write a couple of newsletters on LinkedIn. One is called Chasing Psychological Safety, Monday and Tuesdays, and one is called The Future is Agile on Wednesdays. They unfortunately have to be 2 of them because our community is separated and segregated, and there are 2 different areas of influence, if you wish, and 2 different fields of professionals, unfortunately. And that is part of the problem. It's part of why we are here today. So a little bit about how is it that I've kind of ended up having this stance about technology and this, as you see, conviction that we have to do something. The long story short is that I have built a few products in my time. I have worked for big and small enterprises. I have been an entrepreneur, much as I've been in the belly of the beast and in the corporate world as well. And in those travels, I have always found myself going right back to product, right back to making technology fast. And it became very clear to me very fast that what is it that we need so that we make some of that technology. And I found it super interesting to see how my background in psychology immediately showed itself as useful, because very little had been taught or explained or brought in support of the fact that we work in a world of technology where the interactions between people are more important than ever. And like I say, my background has helped. I have written a couple of books. I've been speaking about this for long enough, but the one that contains some of these ideas is called People Before Tech. And its subtitle is The Importance of Psychological Safety and Teamwork in the Digital Age. And that's kind of really where the meat of it is. I also run a company. I don't just talk about these things and write about these things. I am a chief product officer, so I'm right in there holding the religion of a product myself every day. As the hosts were saying earlier, what we do is we measure psychological safety, which is a thing that, to our shock, nobody was doing by the time we started it. Like I said, I have an obsession with Agile. That's my real life actual tattoo. I can actually, I forgot I'm on a live cam. I can show it to you guys. There you go. But what it really does is it reminds me that I have to keep my work in progress short, and that I have to have a small amount of things in WIP. That said, as you see, there are two tickets in there. And to me, one of them is the technical work and one of them is the human work. And I think that if we don't make equal tickets about this topic, we're going to have issues. Obviously, I don't need to tell you guys why Agile is useful. We can't be making the things we want to be making at the speed we want to be making them at if we don't do that. It's past having to explain why it's important. So if we all know all of these things, why does it take us so long? Because in my view, the problem lies with not necessarily technology. We can't be buying more servers. We can't be laying more pipe. We cannot be having any more post-it notes that we have already, and not even throwing money at this is ever going to fix it, because what we really need is a deep understanding of these bits. And these bits are the tougher bits, and they are the harder bits, and they are hard not only for like your run-of-the-mill developer, but for every one of us. No one who is having their heart in technology is necessarily trained in any of these things. And kind of recognizing our emotions and the emotions of our teammates is more important than ever. We live in a world where our ability to do our job and our ability to deliver the outcomes that the enterprise is asking out of us is chiefly predicated on our ability to collaborate and on our ability to be unafraid, and obviously on the way that we react with others. And unfortunately, no one, like I said, has had any type of training or of a formal or kind of impromptu training in the art of understanding how this type of collaboration and this type of extreme proximity with others in an ideological fashion makes them react from a feelings point of view. So this is the harder bit. Now, I can't really remember whether we've talked about this or not, but this is an extract from my book when it comes to, I've done a little bit of empirical study on what is it that the organizations that have done well with Agile had in common versus the ones that didn't. And you'll see that there's a theme running through all of these. I'll read them because they are important and they each mean something, but the theme will become clear quite quickly. So essentially, the ones that have done well, and by that I mean the one bank that I had studied and a couple of other technology shops, they had very clear organizational permission. They wanted and needed the change, truly. They had somehow rather arrived at servant leadership. And it's incredibly important. It's one of my bear bugs of late. I cannot believe how many organizations exist out there that do not have a transformation program for their leadership to be moved from the command and control that they have gotten comfortable with towards the servant leadership we need today, simply because command and control is no longer fit for purpose, and we all know that. But even the organizations that admit are very slow to truly help their leaders transform. The organizations I'm talking about, they had a good push of just explaining what blockers are, of just telling people that they need to inspire and empower, of kind of taking this servant leadership rhetoric much more seriously. So I think that's an important part. Taking Agile to heart, truly be flexible and adaptive, and a place where, obviously not at absurdum, where we encourage the wrong behavior, but a place where anytime people would experiment, they'd be praised. Anytime people would admit, put their hands up and say they've made a mistake, they'd be praised. So the environment was conducive towards truly trying, towards really giving your all to new ideas, new concepts, having POCs spring left, right, and center. You get the point. So the more flexible at heart, the better. Obviously, if they had an obsession with the consumer, all the better. But if they didn't and they created it during this transformation, that's fine as well. Either way, having a way where you close the feedback loop from your customers is obviously a sine qua non condition to doing the first directive of the manifesto. The thing that these places had in common, and possibly where my whole indignation towards the industry stems from, is that these places, as compared to other places, had an obsession with the idea of team. And I think this is still one of the most telling signs. And if you wish, something that doubles as an internal audit for either of us, if you look around you, think to yourself, how much focus is there on the idea of team? Do you say team a lot? Do you look at the team? Do you feel like a team? Is that notion pervasive through the organization? Because the organizations that have a lesser notion of team, it almost correlates directly to them not having been able to have delivered on Agile or any type of fast technology for evident reasons. Then in that same vein of what has worked for some people, the spirit of continuous everything is what I called it. But it wasn't only the CI/CD notion in technology, but the CI/CD notion of everything. The way they were innovating, the way they were learning, the way they wanted to be better at all times, was inbuilt in the cultures of these organizations that had done well. If you also looked deeper into what they are both measuring and praising and rewarding, those things were from the fluffy list, what some serious organizations would not put on paper as strategy, meaning they consistently rewarded people that shown that they are courageous enough to bring their full selves. And that there's no way to put that on paper without it looking like a fluffy measurement. It isn't. It's broken down in behaviors you can name clearly. But overall, it feels like such a fantastical theoretical idea that we would be rewarding people for things that are quote unquote fluffy. Like I said, they had a culture of experimentation. I won't spend too much on this because we have other things to talk about. But these last two things are super, super important. So it's worth spending 2 seconds. The first one of them is their ability to empower teams. And we talk about this a lot, right, in all industries. We want our teams to be empowered. We want our teams to be independent, for them to be autonomous, and so on. And there's probably not an organization out there that's not saying that, right? So together with servant leadership in almost the same breath, maybe in the same conversation as empathy, you're going to hear the goal of let's empower teams. But whether that's the case or not is a very different story. And I hear a lot of rhetorics today in the market and very little in terms of doing. In the sense of empowering teams is very simple on the surface of it. You need to give them the time, the tools, and the permission and support to be doing the things they need to be doing. But figuring out what is okay, in particular in very siloed organizations, figuring out how to put walled gardens in place to allow them the freedom inside this experimentation vessel of theirs, all of those things are difficult, and they are more difficult the less culturally nimble the organization is. And then last but not least, lower the human debt. They were obsessed with the fact that they knew they had human debt. They had felt it before I put a name on the concept. And they immediately in hindsight, retro clicked with it, if you wish. And they were determined to get rid of it. And so what is this human debt topic? Like I said, I will have to repeat the definition for those of us who haven't seen it. But to me, human debt is the equivalent of technical debt, but for people. So if you think back of all the times that there have been initiatives or projects or just good intentions to do better by our people, but we just kind of never finish them, or the opportunities that there would have been to change things in the lives of our employees when we could have made their work easier, or we could have given them some joy, God forbid, which is still a dirty word in many corporations, and just any of the empty talk that we've heard from the organization when they've paid lip service to equality, to D&I, to respect, to courage, to trust, all of those things that we heard, but they weren't quite truly sorted, if you wish. And then, as I said, anytime that there is missing talk, missing focus on teams, and there's no preoccupation or resources for building a better team dynamic, all of that creates toxic culture, and it amounts to human debt in the same way that cutting corners, writing code amounts to tech debt. And so who is in this situation, right? Who has it? A lot of people would like to believe it's not them. It's not as evident for everyone. It's not as talked about for everyone, but I can assure you everyone does. It's really easy to amass it, even in startups, even in scale-ups, in any size and industry of organization, we can find it. But obviously, in places where waterfall is king or queen still, where command and control is still on the table, where they have super low psychological safety, and that covers, gosh, way too many of all the organizations, and places where a blame culture thrives because of it. So anytime that this happens, where you kind of go and work into these organizations who you feel in your bones have something wrong with them, should do better, should care, should get to a point where you together work towards a goal and towards a purpose, but they don't. And they kind of leave you feeling filled with dread and this continuous expectation of being professional and not discussing your feelings only adds to the burnout. All of that is when you feel human debt. In fact, there are a couple of studies right there out there right now that are not finalized, but I'm keeping an eye on, that will be looking at practically how much of this cognitive load that your organization isn't doing very well, and this cognitive load that you are disengaged, maybe even actively disengaged with your organization, how much of that actually adds directly to burnout. That's what the studies are checking. I'm presuming anecdotally that the correlation is greater than we imagine. So the more we feel the human debt, the more burnt out we are. So where does it exist? Kind of, is it just because some companies cannot get their act straight, right? What is this human debt thing at an organizational level? So like we said, people work projects that have been started and abandoned, lip service, when there's bad leadership, and gosh, does that encompass everything? A lot of it is accidental. I truly believe, leaders are not necessarily a-holes. They simply are people that don't have either the luxury of not being afraid, or the ability and resources and training themselves to be a leader. But either way, it still falls under the umbrella of bad leadership. When we have sudden changes, and I've met hundreds of organizations over the last few years who seem to be stuck in this eternal cycle of change. It just simply, you won't be hearing of any leadership team that lasted for more than 2 or 3 years. And so anytime there's change, people take a beat and they reflect, yes, but they also breathe in and slow down and lose touch with purpose and are riddled with fear, and that just adds to the human debt. So huge changes, bad leadership, they bring more to it. As I said, anything that is considered a Friday initiative. So anytime that the fluffy topics of empathy, of EQ, of understanding how the dynamic works, when those are considered Friday initiatives, there's something we do after work. If we have enough pizza, we might be chatting about this. If not, we can leave it because it's not as important as the delivery work. All of that, just kind of putting these topics in a box at the end of the week is just a really bad sign that there's a lot of human debt. Like I said, if there are big topics that are still felt as not completely crystal clear to employees, be them the big topics of the societal big topics of D&I and employee well-being, or the newer ones that are also bringing to the human debt, the ways of work, the clarity on that, and so on. Anytime that organizations are doing sterile surveys, and we all, absolutely without fault, I've never met anyone who can put their hand up and say, not me, not us. I've never worked in a place where they've asked me something once a year and I knew it was a useless survey, but I still clicked on things and carried on with life. If I ever met anyone who told me that they haven't seen one, I'd love to pick their minds and figure out what work life they've had. But for the rest of us, we've done sterile surveys every month or every few months, and we know they're useless. Nothing ever comes back from those surveys, does it? We might hear around the grapevine about this project that was produced as a knee-jerk reaction, and then that just kind of dies down, goes into the big pile of things that we never really finished. At worst, there are surveys that do come back, and when they do, it's typically with punitive acts attached, meaning somehow or other they've managed to make their way into the performance reviews or into the conversation with the line managers, and they just all of a sudden our attitude towards the sterile survey becomes an issue, and it can come to bite us. So, and evidently all of this just adds to the culture of fear and how we are avoiding any type of failure and any type of honesty as well, just in case it ends us in a bad place. Again, allowing toxic politics, even staying silent, systemic bullying that we are private to almost every day is just adding to it. Command and control, we said this a billion times. And then obviously unhappy and unengaged employees. But I think what surprised me when I was researching this is the fact that there is a lot of human debt at the team level as well. And you'll see that the last one on this list is blaming the organization. I think that adds to the human debt in itself. When us as a team, us as individuals, were able to just put our hands up and say, this has nothing to do with me. I cannot change this in any which way. It's them only. That only adds to it, because there's so much that can be done at the human and team level directly. So here are some examples of when we add human debt ourselves at the team level. When we do impression management, and I've spoken about this before, I'll try and give you a quick definition for anyone who hasn't heard that. Impression management is practically the set of negative behaviors when we are afraid to speak our minds for fear of losing face, of changing our image that we project towards our work peers by appearing ignorant, by appearing negative, by appearing intrusive, or by appearing disruptive. So anytime that we are afraid to not look that way and we don't open our mouths, so we just bite our lip and not say what we have in mind, whether it's to have a different opinion, or it is to kind of have a dissent moment, or just play devil's advocate, whatever it is that we want to do, and we didn't do for fear of those four things, that's impression management. And it is extremely detrimental to the feeling of psychological safety that we need so badly to be high performing in teams. So one of the things that we could do at team level is to learn when we do impression management, and to start seeing those instances become less and less, simply because we've understood our triggers. So this is one of the quickest wins I always advise teams to get right away, which is understand impression management, start counting in their heads. They don't even have to share it. When is it that they are engaging in it? Another thing that teams do, and I'll go through these slightly faster, I'm not sure what time we have, but just there's no reason to go through them too slowly. You guys have seen these on your own anyways. But when we feel tension and we just go like, that's not my thing, I'm not going to touch it. Or we see that someone's being treated unfairly, or we know that there are big things that we need to discuss, but we don't. For instance, if we know that we've had either a really big break or something happened in the team, I don't know if everyone here is familiar with Patrick Lencioni's various stages. You can use his framework or any other framework, but the reality of it is, when the team comes together and changes happen in their lives, there are multiple stages that the team dynamic goes through. So when you do have those changes in the team dynamic, but then you don't have a come together and do a team relaunch or a team building exercise, that's when you add even more human debt. Like I said, I won't spend a lot of time on each of them, but overall, it's any time that we could have done human work and we didn't, right? When we didn't do any kind of conversation on how do others feel, how do we feel, what is it that we can do as a team so that we move forward. And like I said, lastly, blaming the organization is one of the big ones that will always come back to haunt us. Before we move forward, and I know this is breaking the point of my presentation, but it's more important that we hit on it. one of the things here is super important. I was going to jump over it. Not treating the human work as delivery ops or devs work is the biggest takeaway from this conversation. I cannot say this enough. If you're in charge of anyone's whip, if you're in charge of anyone's backlog, if you can at all limit people's work in progress, please do that for them, because until we give them some time to breathe, to understand those emotions and to have those conversations with their peers, they're just not going to get very far. So we have to carve the time and to understand that the human work will speed us up on the delivery and ops and dev work. We have actually right now with all of our clients, I'm keeping a keen eye on trying to get measurement from their agile output as well, just to kind of connect how much faster they are once they do their human work as a habit. So hopefully I'll have some results on that sometime soon to share with you guys, but it's hard work. We're pushing a big boulder up here. I will admit that. So it takes a minute. So the things that we can do, that some of that we can do ourselves in teams, some of that it's an organization that needs to do. I know they're mixed, but it's just hard to know who's going to hear this. So audit the human debt honestly. There aren't any set ways to do that. I'm sure that the McKinseys and the PwCs and so on are going to quickly assemble a team of geniuses. They're going to tell you this is the framework for auditing human debt. As long as they send me my TM $3, I'm fine with that. They can try and do that. But realistically, it's not the kind of work that you need McKinsey to do. It's the kind of work that a truly honest organization can do themselves. And I think that process alone of introspection, of going, right, where all have we gone wrong on the human bit and what more can we do, is useful. So I would say everyone needs to do it on their own. Then reframing on data and actions. We found this the hard way as we were building our software. We can talk about this as much as we like. We can have 100 magical moments. People can completely resonate. We've seen tears, we've seen people telling us things that they've never told their peers before. We've seen all kinds of emotional responses. None of these things have the same power that data and actions will give you. If you let people see their own data about the way that they behave, that is a really powerful motor to keep them trying to do better. In the absence of that is an awareness building exercise, which is good, and we need it, but it's not good enough, and it will not hold us further. Like I said, organizational support for the human work, that's where it's at. We have to find a way as companies that we not only allow, but mandate that these guys, our people, our own people, who were already loading with more work than they can actually really do, they need to find the time to be helping us with this by doing the human work at the team level. And for that, we have to pay them for that. We have to praise them for that. We have to give them the time for it and the tools. It's not something we should expect that they do without help. So, like I said, I mentioned this multiple times and I'll try to speed it up. We believe that it all hinges on psychological safety. Teams that have psychological safety find a way towards the human work faster than other ones. And if they don't have it, they don't function at all. So never mind the human work, never mind the technical work. Without psychological safety, teams can do none of the work. And if you look at the results of the Aristotle project from Google, it tells you that very clearly. The number one thing in common all teams that were performant had was this sense of psychological safety. They also had other things, right? They had dependability, and I strongly encourage everyone to have it. God knows how difficult it is when we don't. Structure and clarity, probably the number one and most important thing that any organization should be doing for their people is to insist that there is structure and clarity at every corner. And if it takes doing definitions of every word again, that's fine. If it takes clarifying the hierarchical structure every Monday, that's fine as well. Whatever it takes, structure and clarity is super important. And obviously, meaning and impact. Cannot stress that enough. If we don't have the clarity of that, we cannot be high performing. But what do we do about this human work? What are the bits and pieces that we can put in place that will start helping right away? So for instance, one of the things we've learned is, if you look on the left hand of the screen, it took us an act of God to even get to that. So we started with this nice little logo of us that's half a brain, half a heart. And we still believe that's where it's at. It's half the brain and half the heart. But it took us years almost, and multiple teams that moved us towards the correct outcome, to understand that the only way the people are going to be doing the human work is if they can see the results of their work. So if we can close that feedback loop, if we can make sure that they see how their data looks in terms of their behaviors, that's what's going to propel them to doing more of it. So it took us a long while, but it's one of the findings that I think it's worth keeping in mind. So empower teams, entrust them with the work, this work, the human work. Say to them, look, at an organizational level, there have been mistakes done. We haven't sorted these things, and we are now at a place where we're half afraid, half tired, half in no mood for this. Help me get back on track. You and I know we cannot be building anything agile and anything that's a technology product that's competing with the rest of Silicon Valley if we don't fix these things. So help me out. Here are some things. Here's some data. Here are some tools, and please help us out and do this work at your own team level. Like I say, obsess with the data to close the feedback loop. That is what ensures that there's continuous improvement at team level. Limit work in progress to fit the human work. The teams we see that do the best are the teams that use our playbook before they do the retro. So say that, for instance, they have this plan to be doing some of the human work in the retro. They need to start with that. If that remains as something they'll do afterwards, it just never gets done. So the number one practical tip is, if you have any to do that's a human work to do, put it first. Get it out of the way first. If it's last, it just never gets done. Obviously, demanding the right tools and support is crucial. Different teams need different things. We, for instance, make a playbook that has all of these details, actions that they could be doing on their own. And some teams go letter by what we gave them, and they're very grateful for the help and so on. And some teams don't need them. They write their own custom actions and they try new things. And those are the teams we bring in so that they co-create place with us so other teams can take them into their own organizations. Right. And then this is a big one. Ensure that at some point, and won't be day one, and it won't be easy, and it will take a lot of superheroes begging and explaining and showing another 50 slides again, but ensure the organization rewards people for the human work. Because number one, we have to overcome the resistance of these people towards the human work, of which there's plenty. We'll talk about it in a second. And number two, we then have to make sure that they are being paid for it. Otherwise, why would we be expecting them to carry on doing it? So those are the things that I believe are super important. And like I said, there are good behaviors in the workplace, and then there are bad behaviors in the workplace. It's that simple. The bad ones, some of which we've discussed, there were some examples there in the impression management conversation. The good ones are obviously those where we speak up courageously at all times. And then if we ask the right questions, again, if you have software like ours, it's a lot easier. We can do this, as I call it, pen and paper, just yourself and your team. It's doable. It's a lot harder, but it's still doable, and it's worth it because it starts them on the correct kind of process. Like I said, in the case of impression management, just asking the right questions will start making people understand the triggers. And then obviously start doing the actual hands-on human work. In our case, like I said, we have a playbook with things that guide you through it, but it doesn't even have to be that. You can do some of these things on your own. They are, some of them, detailed on our newsletters. We were very open source with our ideas of plays. We want everyone to try these on their own first. But obviously, depending on the stage and the dynamic that the team is in, different things are needed, right? There are teams that struggle with engagement, for instance, or the emotional bond. Then they need to get up on the emotional bond really quickly. There are teams that are completely inflexible. They need to be doing some role-playing flexibility, or that they need to be kind of making sure that it all comes together from the point of view of having a healthy dynamic. The one you're looking at in front of you is sorely needed when you have one or two people that are already on the defensive and have so much of this human debt on their shoulders that they are hard to bring on board, and they have already slipped into that negative, Nelly, continuous mental place that disallows them from being a true part of the team. And sometimes having this organized moment of catharsis where people say what's on their mind, what the chip on their shoulders is about, that having that moment allows them to kind of move forward in with a much clearer slate and then engage in the human works. But again, this is just an example. There are maybe 30, 40 actions that we have in our software, but there's other places you can get them from. And I don't know what your team needs, but they need something. And obviously, like I say, every one of us should be doing it. We talked about this, making it a priority, getting it on the sprint, even in the tickets. I've seen teams that have written it in their Jira, much as it pained them at first to write a nice little ticket about do team action about each other's kids. It really pained them, but they got it in there. And once it was there, it was done. And so whatever it is that your process has central to it, it's worth getting into it because it takes a while. It takes a while to coach people over the team level resistance. And that's because we talked about this before. They have had the punitive bits, they have had the sterile surveys, they have had the nobody cares how you feel and what you feel at work for 20, 30 years. So there's no reason for them to believe that this is a serious thing. It's not fluffy. It's being remunerated. It is super important. So the only thing you have to go by on is that vast majority of these people are, or all of these people are super, super smart. And they will show them the evidence, show them the numbers, the science behind this, and they will understand it and come along on the journey, but it will take a minute. Like I said, reward and praise. Any BS, any PR rhetoric that you hear from the organization or even your own people, that needs calling out at all times. Measuring, super important, obsessed with impression management, and like I said, do that first and then do other bits after all. At an organization level, if anyone's listening, an honest human debt audit, a serious one. And then another big piece of it is check if you have psychological safety at the top. And let me tell you, what you also might not have at the top, and you'll find that out really quickly, is a team or several teams. The higher up you go in organizations, the less the prevalence of actual teams there is, right? So people no longer are teams, they're work groups, they're PR groups, they're presentation groups, they go in and they peacock and posture to each other, but they don't actually work together towards a goal. So creating teams at the top and making sure they have psychological safety will have a ripple effect. Like I say, always connected to results and data. Show your people how it makes sense and why it makes sense and how much faster they are, what their throughput is like, and what else happens when we do the human work. I presume that this conversation is mostly between us technologists, but I will be honest, we have to coach HR. We have to get HR to come back and help us because they have been gone and they are not in this conversation of how to make collaboration work, how to make fear go, how to make people work in a distributed team in this day and age. They are just not in the conversation. The lessons we have learned trying to create DevOps pipes that tell us that it doesn't work unless people pair program, unless people talk to each other, unless people are in dojos. Those lessons are not evident to HR, and they have lost the agency of trying to help us. So one of two things, either we take this work upon ourselves and every CTO, COO, Scrum Master, product owner goes, I got this, I'm in charge of my own people, don't worry your pretty head, you fire and hire them. Or we just ask them to help us truly. So I have as you can hear, I'm very agitated about the topic of either we get HR on board or they need to not be doing this. Because right now, if I'm honest, they are a very serious break function in the business prevention department from many points of view. So. Right. Like I said, gargantuan effort to change servant leadership and empower teams. Not going to be easy, but if we don't do it in an organized fashion, it's not going to happen overnight and on its own. And then obviously recognizing the human work. So a couple of things to leave you with. Distributing the work to lower the human debt, I think needs to be done to the only unit capable of doing so, which is your own team. And given enough ability and enough time, they will be doing it with glee, actually. And then obviously, if we have enough data and evidence of improvement, teams will come along on the journey. Like I said, I'm not sure what this even means to anyone listening to this, because no one here has the power to ask their CEO and board of directors how much of a team they are. But I think the more that we normalize that they should be a team, the less they will be able to continue with in situations that are not teamy. Right. Advocating for the remuneration of the people work is a big job, and someone needs to do it. Like I said, we need superheroes still. We need people that will carry how important it is to, so your product owners, your anyone else that's pushed the human work and coached over the resistance is the same person that needs to go back to the organization and say, look, they are doing it an hour a week or whatever it is, 10 hours, whatever it is, 10 minutes if it is. They are doing it, and I need you to recognize how important this work is and how much you need it so that they feel they should keep on doing it. Which also means that teams will finally, ideally, have the tools and the time they need to increase their EQ, better their behaviors. That's all we're trying to do. And if we do that and we have enough lack of fear, and then we make sure that both individuals and teams do this work regularly and habitually as part of their everyday work, then we can hope to be shifting some of this human debt. Obviously, last but not least, I would say that I think this is the easiest lever of performance. We need to increase the psychological safety of the teams. That's where it's at. It's the fastest way to get anywhere. And those teams will then be taking care of the human work themselves. Some of this stuff is in the book. You can also come talk to us, and if you wanted to see a demo of our software, but just in general, kind of anything you had as a question or as an idea, more than open on LinkedIn and everywhere else. But let me see if we had questions in the meantime. Not that I can see, and I can't see the actual live on LinkedIn, but no, thank you so much.
There isn't any in either, but feel free to unmute and ask your questions away.
Well, thank you, first of all, for a very engaging presentation.
Oh, thank you.
That hits all the right nerves. And one of the things I'd like to ask is you could talk a little bit more about obsessing with impression management.
Yeah. Yes, that's a really good one. So I'm all about quick wins. If there are ways to kind of move really quickly, I'm always for finding those. And so that's why I'm saying, in terms of moving this big work, psychological safety is that quick win. And in terms of moving psychological safety, focusing on impression management is actually that quick win. So you're practically going to the root of the problem, which is if we get the definition of impression management in front of our people, we've noticed that they lower their impression management simply from understanding, having the awareness of what it is. It is that simple. It's a very basal CBT effect of changing behavior immediately after you recognize the wrong one. It doesn't, fix everything. It's not a cure for all ailments. But if people understand, impression management is when I was in this meeting and someone said something and I just didn't agree or didn't want to say anything, despite the fact that I wasn't on board. That's when we were impression managing. And it's worth going, why was I doing that? Was I afraid that if I say something, I'm going to look down? Or am I going to look incompetent? Or am I going to look to my peers like I'm just being negative for the sake of being negative? Why have I stopped myself from talking? And if we ask ourselves enough times why that is, then people stop doing it. One of the plays that we find most effective in our playbook is called an impression management counter. All it does is teaches people, asks the right questions, and asks people to keep an eye on it for the next week and just kind of have this mental counter, the same way that they have it when you get on a plane, when they click you on, of the times that they would have engaged if they were talking to friends versus they didn't engage because they were afraid in the team. And once they do that, we see impression management lowering and psychological safety going up.
Thank you.
Very welcome. Thank you for asking. That's a really good question.
Does anybody else have any more questions?
I'll just make another comment to say that I very much appreciate your observation that human work is work, because maybe some of my colleagues here on the call might have experienced that sometimes the work is only defined as, well, what features are you going to produce, or what product you're going to produce, and not the things that support the product. And that's often described as ignoring, say, the architecture or the QC. But you've actually opened a whole new can of worms on this by saying, if we also ignore the human work and don't do that regularly, we're not really becoming our best. So it's just something that bothers me quite a bit, is the lack of recognizing that all work is work, and therefore that effort and time needs to be, and the cost needs to be allocated. And yet here you are, you've opened another door here to say, don't forget that the human development also needs to be allocated for, even scheduled, so that it happens and doesn't get ignored. So I truly appreciate that.
Thank you. That's very kind to say. And it's a genuinely a big thing to ask out of people. We've told them so long, just sit here and program, and you don't need to. And let's face it, that, much as it's a generalization, chances are that people in our industry, like myself, and I get to say that, are somewhat on the spectrum. So the human work is harder for them. It's genuinely harder for them. But we have found ourselves in technology in a position where, while this work is harder, it's also impossible to ignore, simply because we cannot do what we're trying to do any other way than by collaborating in extremis, and by pair programming and dojoing and all the things we need to be doing. And those things are, by definition, how we react with others. Like I say, not an easy job, but I feel that if we were to put our minds to it, one, for it to become a habit, and a remunerated one, and two, we would give people the tools. I am always surprised at developers, how hungry they are for doing this work once they believe it's not just a joke and something that's just trying to overlay on their feature demands. How open they are, how willing they are. The amount of people that have started by saying, oh no, this action better take 15 minutes, I don't have 30. And then a week or two later, they'd go, is it okay if we repeat this one and do the longer one that's 3 hours this week? No one's asking them to, but they can directly see the effect in data, and it makes them go, give me more of this, because I can see it. So that's where we're at.
You use the word fluffy in your presentation, and then earlier than that, you talked about the human work being hard work. And I think what you have touched on is the unfortunate perception that, or misperception, that psychological safety is a fluffy, nice to have, easygoing, something that doesn't create business value. And I agree. I think this is hard work. This is as hard as any technical work. It does not result in comfort. Often it results in the appropriate kind of discomfort. Exactly. And so I actually don't like the term psychological safety, because it sort of comes off as, oh, another feel-good self-help, fluffy, soft thing, and I've got to get to work. So I hear what you're saying.
Amy herself has said not long ago that she's not very pleased, but then again, she didn't come up with the term. She found it, like all of us. It's been researched.
Well, it's in the basic research, or the beginning research, and of course she called her book The Fearless Organization, and avoided the use of the term, as you did as well. And by the way, it's very impressive that she provided the forward to your book. So that
eternally grateful, bless her.
That is really so. I look forward to reading your work.
That's very sweet. Thank you. No, you're right. Because of the term sounding like job security or mental health or just some fluffy stuff no one has time for, it really hasn't paid any service to it. But realistically, there are numbers on psychological safety. I've taken out that slide for this presentation, but I use it all the time, where I go like, look, what is your goal? Is it retention? Is it productivity? Is it more money in the bank? Whatever your goal is, this thing, that's why I'm saying it's like the golden key to most things. This thing will push those things up by 20, 30, 40%. That's a lot of money in the bank. It's your biggest number. But let's face it, we're talking to organizations that don't even quantify their lack of engagement. So it's hard to show them why this one indicator is super important. But you're right, if it had a different name, maybe if it were called magical productivity feeling, then we would have had more execs buying things.
It's a good term. It's a very exact term. It's
Yeah.
just misunderstood. So the work that you do to explain it makes it much sharper edged, which is good. It should
Thank
be.
I appreciate that.